tuning in to the Eggman Empire. Authorization approved. Access granted.
What's happening, seniors and infants? My name is KotyTang. We're back with a deep dive into the IDW series. If you haven't been keeping up, be sure to check out the other videos, or just start here, whatever you want to do. Issue 19. We open with some exposition on the city, delivered by Rouge. Apparently, Sunset City was one of the most prestigious cities in whatever region they're currently living in. That is to say, until Sonic Forces happened. Thanks to the restoration, it's been pretty much rebuilt. Wait, really? How much did the restoration actually help this city out? The restoration was formed after Metal Sonic happened, and it's only been at most a couple weeks since then. How much could the restoration have actually helped in that time? Regardless of that, Eggman launched his Metal Virus, so now the city is falling apart. Sonic arrives, shouting out to anybody who may still be unaffected by the virus. Suddenly, a group of survivors calls to him from inside a building, and as he goes to save them, bullets rain down on the Zombots. I guess they shot Sonic since he yells out, "Ow?" The gunner is revealed to be E123 Omega, stating that he's going to be upping the lethality of his bullets. Sonic tells Omega that the Zombots are actually innocent people and shouldn't be killed because of this. Omega argues with Sonic that they look like robots to him, to which Sonic agrees for some reason, and Omega comes to the conclusion that they should be destroyed. Sonic realizes that the Zombots are stronger than what Omega can dish out, so he just stops caring. Rouge makes herself known to Sonic and orders him to send all the survivors to the Grand Gold Flicky Hotel, while Omega continues fighting the Zombots back. This is pretty much what I've been waiting for. How will Team Dark react to the Metal Virus? Shadow literally doesn't even have to touch them. He can warp out of any danger and can just throw Chaos Spears at them all day long. Omega is a robot. He also happens to be one of the most powerful robots in the entire series, not only having the frame that makes him like a tank, but the artillery to back it up. Rouge, of course, has the ability to fly, so it'll be easy for her to swoop down and save people. She's basically the only member lacking the ability to range out the Zombots or make herself invincible. Although she does have bombs that she can drop, I suppose. Either way, Rouge is the most likely person to go down here, while Shadow and Omega shouldn't face a shred of an issue against the Zombots. As Sonic successfully herds the people to the hotel, Rouge commands, this guy in SWAT armor, and Sonic is all, "Oh, giving orders now?" Yes, Sonic. Yes, she's giving orders. She did this in Sonic Forces as well. This comic is based a little bit after that. Basically, every one of Sonic's friends were giving some kind of order, in fact. They all pretty much led the resistance together. What a stupid comment to even say. Can the IDW team fact check anything? These guys are supposed to be these massive Sonic fans, yet can't even get the character interactions correct? Yes, by her character, it is an unusual thing for Rouge to be giving orders to a military force. That is in a regular day-to-day life scenario for her, but as we've already seen in Sonic Forces, when pushed to it, she's perfectly fine with not only commanding, but also gaining intel for whoever she's assisting. Dude, is anything going to be consistent here? IDW cannot get anything correct here. Rouge comments that Eggman is giving a sloppy performance here, and Sonic says it's because Eggman can't control the Zombots. Again, Sonic just knows this because reasons. Sonic asks where Shadow is, to which Rouge replies that he's picking up a transport for survivors. The crowd reaches the hotel after running from Zombots, and Sonic almost makes the mistake of instinctually grabbing the citizen's hand. Instead, he jumps toward the oncoming Zombots, and he does something that, in actuality, is absolutely more dangerous than grabbing one guy's hand. And let's not forget the important fact that processed material cannot be infected. If everybody is wearing gloves, then honestly, there should be no issue so long as there is no skin-to-skin contact. But apparently, I understand IDW's virus better than they do. So here's the actual dangerous thing that Sonic does. Sonic lifts every Zombot up into a massive tornado where it becomes completely uncertain just where exactly they're going to land. But of course, by pure plot, the Zombots somehow manage to land on nobody, as well as missing every window and every car imaginable, and everybody is just safe somehow. Let's pause for a second before continuing because we need to address this. Who are these guys? They're not the Resistance. They're not the Restoration. They're not Gun. Where were these dudes when Metal Sonic was attacking? Nobody in the Restoration dresses like this. The IDW team is so dog shit at world building. You absolutely cannot present an entire military organization, say nothing about it, and act like they've just always been there. Is this the real Team Dark or something? This is Shadow, Rouge, and Omega's army? Who are these guys? Next time we see the Restoration, I better see everybody in a uniform like this. Sonic and Omega struggle to keep the Zombots at bay, as they now approach from both sides, when suddenly, an enormous truck comes barreling through the army of Zombots, and the driver is revealed to be none other than Shadow the Hedgehog, coming through with the transport. Shadow here is pissed off at Sonic for letting Mr. Tinker live, and he blames Sonic for the entire apocalypse happening right now, stating that Sonic deserves to be infected. And you know what? I actually can sympathize with Shadow here. His reaction to seeing Sonic again is entirely reasonable and actually grounded in fact. Shadow has a solid argument here. Sonic is then ready to blow off some steam after his argument with Shadow, and he needs to run off his virus anyway. Remember, because he can't just run back and forth really fast, he has to go 70 miles away. Sonic tells Shadow to not let the Zombots touch him, and in case they do, he reassures him that running will throw the virus off, to which Shadow replies, "Cowards run, I win." Oh. So Shadow is pulled right out of Sonic Boom here. Alright, well, a Shadow's going to become a Zombot. The very instant that you read, "Cowards run, I win," you already know what it is. Shadow is going to be impossibly stupid for no reason, and he's going to become a Zombot. Well, let's see how this one plays out. Shadow and Omega prepare to fight the Zombots. While Shadow tells Omega to guard the truck, Shadow will be taking on the Zombots head on. For whatever reason that is, right? Shadow launches his Chaos Spears and oh, I didn't even think about his shoes. Well, hold up now. That is a pretty awesome use of some powers here. Shadow literally doesn't have to touch these guys at all. See, this is what I was talking about. Shadow is basically invincible against these guys. Just look at all these abilities Shadow has to never have to touch the Zombots. Whoa, wait a minute. Rouge says that Shadow's being too reckless. Wait, so Shadow starts spin dashing and he's kicking the shoes. What? Oh, okay, we're fine. It's because he's also resilient, of course. Well, I mean, he hasn't been affected with the virus even after touching them directly. Ah, yes, these are quite the lines by Shadow. This is exactly how he talks. So accurate. I can only imagine Kirk Thornton's snaky Shadow saying this. Resilient, but so am I. The Doctor's metal virus can't infect the ultimate life form. God, how cringe was that? Do you think the thought process for writing this line was like Shadow is just hyping himself up? Or did he want Rouge and Omega to hear him saying this? I'm sorry, I don't usually focus on the dialogue, but Shadow and Dr. Starline just suck. Back over to Sonic. He's finally run off the virus, and Sonic starts getting tired. Yeah, Sonic the Hedgehog himself is starting to get exhausted from all this constant running. Well, that's not good. Sonic reasons with himself that his decisions to give Mr. Tinker a second chance was still positive. I think everybody would disagree. Eggman was always bound to come back, but sure. So back to Shadow, constantly touching the Zombots and showing no signs of being infected. Shadow decides he's going to choke one of the Zombots out. So now he's infected. Remember guys, gloved hand. I think IDW thinks that their gloves are actually a part of their bodies. What would the virus be spreading out to if it can't latch on to processed material? It wouldn't be spreading. It would just kind of fall off. it has nothing to expand off of. But as we've seen before, shirts, shoes, and gloves are organic material. It's just a part of their body. You know, this brings up an interesting oversight on IDW's part. Wouldn't the virus fall off if Shadow was spin dashing and using these tornado-like moves? Well, of course, as we've seen earlier, this isn't the case, as Sonic is still completely infected after he does this tornado move, and earlier against Rough and Tumble, the virus didn't fall off when he spin dashed there either. But let's actually consider that for a second, because IDW thinks that I wouldn't think of this, but I did. These attacks should actually remove the virus faster than running would itself. The speed required to not only launch themselves into a spin dash, as well as create an entire tornado out of how fast they're going, should be more than enough to maintain the virus. But, of course, IDW just didn't really think about how this virus would work, so they didn't consider that making it speed-based, while making both Sonic and Shadow use speed-based moves, would actually make the virus fall off every time. So of course, because IDW just makes the virus work however they want, both Shadow and Sonic are now infected. And Shadow, well, he doesn't try to run. Rouge tells him he has to retreat, and in the most out-of-character thing I've ever seen from Shadow, being told to retreat angers him, and he says that he doesn't run. So he starts punching the Zombots. Yeah, you heard that right. Shadow, the combat prodigy. He doesn't find a clever way to get rid of the virus. He doesn't stop enhancing the virus. Instead, he starts punching the Zombots. And over time, of course, Shadow is overrun. Okay, so to start, we had a solid chance of character growth here. Sonic's heart was too large and he couldn't bring himself to actually punish Mr. Tinker when it really came down to it. Shadow specifically states this is a mistake and is very adamant about it. But Shadow concedes and lets Sonic have his way, understanding what Sonic sees. Here, Shadow was able to prove that his way of doing things is correct. And what does Shadow do in this moment? Well, he completely loses every single shred of reason he had and gets himself overrun by Zombots, completely undercutting everything this comic had built up for Shadow so far. Specifically, the part where Shadow knew better than to let Eggman exist as Mr. Tinker. Shadow was without a shred of doubt the only person who could see through everything else. Shadow had this shining moment to teach Sonic this lesson that not everybody can be forgiven, and should the moment arise, a person like Eggman will return to their evil ways. Whether it was because of Starline or something else, which in IDW's case, it was actually Metal Sonic, not Starline. They seem to not realize that they wrote it like that. Shadow being overrun here essentially makes it as though Shadow just happened to be correct on a whim, rather than him grounding it on the facts as he understood them. Here we can clearly see that it was just Shadow's arrogance and he just really didn't like Dr. Eggman. That's it, full stop. He didn't think it through. He was just like, that's Dr. Eggman and he needs to die. That was literally it. That's how simple-minded Shadow is. Which contradicts the fact that he had to reason with Sonic until they came to an agreement. And that's just the comic version of Shadow that they built up. If we include the games, it's clear that in no instance ever would Shadow ever do what he just did in the comic. We're gonna use the comic's direct source of inspiration to prove that as well. Sonic Forces. Shadow is one of the only solo warriors still around and has never let his own arrogance let himself take on more than he could chew. There's really no excuse for what just happened. No matter what the reason was, no matter who was writing it, no matter what was discussed, when it comes down to it, we're here for the writing. And in every single conceivable way, this will forever be completely unacceptable. Now, this is not only a writing failure on IDW, but also Sega. Both companies suffer for having Shadow mandated so heavily to where nobody really knows how they're supposed to write him. It does a disservice to fans of the franchise and fans of Shadow in general. For however long these Shadow mandates exist, everybody who wrote for this franchise will always be at fault for how Shadow is written. And that's the sad reality of it. If they wanted to write for Shadow, the best thing they could have done is not write for him at all. The value of anything Shadow was able to be placed in is entirely diminished due to him being mischaracterized by every writer. If Sega has an ounce of care for the publicity of all their writers, they'll allow Shadow to be as nuanced as every other character is allowed to be. If we're really thinking about it, Shadow being a part of this arc wouldn't be enough to change the tides. The Zombots are an unstoppable army. At best, Shadow can keep them at bay in one area. But just like Sonic, he can't be everywhere at once. Without the emeralds, which are literally owned by Eggman right now, Shadow cannot use his chaos abilities to their full potential. Shadow can only resort to minor teleports, chaos spears, and his own mind. If anything, Shadow's at his most limited in this arc. Is it really the case that IDW thinks he'd still be too strong? This will probably be the most catastrophic arc in IDW's entire run. I could be wrong about that, but going off that assumption, that means that at IDW's most dire, they still view Shadow as way too powerful to be included, and they find a way to remove him. Which means that there will never be an arc where Shadow can ever have any sort of significant use. Shadow's entire character would have just died in this comic for good here if that's the case. Now, I've looked into this quite a bit. I mean, after I read this moment, it just felt so out of left field and insane to me. So I had to research what the hell happened here. And in return, I've come out feeling lied to by Ian Flynn specifically. Yeah, I know I said I wasn't going to do a direct call out, but I think this one actually deserves one. I'll dive way deeper into this on the actual Full Metal Virus review, but I'll touch on it briefly right now. Ian Flynn's original idea for this scene, as said by him in his Bumblecast of August 23rd of 2022, which would have been a whopping 3 years after this issue was released. Ian Flynn specifically says that Shadow, in his arrogance of him being the ultimate life form, would have continued fighting either way, and when he essentially becomes backed into a corner, he was supposed to remove his inhibitor rings, and then after using up all his energy, he would have become a Zombot through being knocked unconscious through a power overload.
The original thing that I wanted to do was that Shadow, in his arrogance, thought that he would be immune because he was the ultimate life form, and that as the virus encroached upon him, he'd take off his limiter rings and use that Chaos Shadow kind of pseudo form to burn it off, thinking that he had the power to overwhelm it, and that it just continued to adapt until he was overcome, and that ultimately it was his hubris that brought him down.
As Ian Flynn puts it, Shadow was going to go down by his own hubris no matter what. Shadow was always planned to be removed from this arc, period. Ian never planned for Shadow to act correctly. Ian just wanted to use the inhibitor rings. That's literally the only thing that he said Sega told him to not do in this issue. Yet, originally, he was blaming Sega in Bumblecast 111. He flat out stated that Sega made him write Shadow the way they did, and that Shadow's entire personality is a mystery to even him still.
I thought I had figured out what Sega wants from the character now, but I guess if you look at what very little we see in Forces and the far more confrontational single note we got in Team Racing, I think that's the direction they want to go now. So it's the same as it ever was. I'll do what I can with what I'm given. It's basically what I was using in the Archie books. But that doesn't seem to be the case anymore? Question mark.
Is that just a bold-faced lie that you told to all of us? Well, not necessarily, right? Here's where being vague works in his favor. Yes, they did make him write Shadow a certain way. That part is true. However, he didn't specifically say what it is that they made him change until 3 years later.
Ultimately, it was decided that introducing the limiter rings was too much to do at that juncture, along with the Chaos Shadow form.
Remember in Sonic Forces, where Shadow was one of the sole survivors? And on top of that, he was a solo agent, acting almost entirely on his own? That's what IDW's based off of, right? It comes right after that story. Funny how Shadow never let himself be put in a situation that he couldn't handle. No, Sega did not make Ian write Shadow like he's an idiot that gets caught up in his own ego. And no, they did not force Shadow to be removed from this arc. That's the implication that Ian had given in Bumblecast 111. Both of these things were always Ian's plan. The only thing that they made Ian change was that Shadow could not use his inhibitor rings. That is the only change that they made per his own admission. And Ian actually doubles down on this, stating that he could have found a more satisfying way to take Shadow out.
I should have just stepped back and looked at the whole thing and said, okay, how do I approach this from a completely different angle rather than try to make what was there work? Maybe I would have found a more satisfying way to bring things about.
Ian just straight up used Sega as a scapegoat, and nobody is calling him out on this? Rouge requests backup for Sunset City for whatever reason. I mean, the city is entirely lost at this point. Backup is just going to create an even worse situation overall. It probably would have made more sense for Rouge to just update them that they're retreating and Sunset City is lost. Sonic arrives and Rouge tells Sonic that he needs to handle Shadow. A weird choice of words, but either way, Sonic realizes that Shadow has now become a Zombot. Issue 20. Sonic and Shadow have their rousing battle. I'll give IDW the credit of it being an actual fight between the two for once. However, due to the Zombot's influence, Shadow is not quite himself when it comes to combat, and he's basically just a mindless enemy. So it's not really the fight we're all looking for. For some reason, Shadow has gained claws and has various red hues to him. Some strange mutation that is specific to Shadow. I'm sure it's just because IDW thought it looked cool. I guarantee it won't have any bearing on the development of the virus itself. I find it funny how Sonic noticed how the Zombots didn't pinpoint second listen to Eggman and called out this major revelation of how they no longer listen to him, yet Shadow's clear mutation of the virus isn't commented on at all, just further cementing that IDW just thought it looked cool. Sonic realizes that he can't take on a horde of Zombots as well as protect the survivors, but luckily, Rouge is done packing the truck, and Sonic gives the okay to get out of there, to which Rouge happily obliges. Omega, seeing the virus getting worse on Sonic, tells him to leave as well, to which Sonic says he's not leaving another friend behind, and Omega bluntly states that they are not friends. Sonic tries to tell him they need to leave, and Omega denies retreating or giving mercy, and immediately starts attacking Shadow with murderous intent. You know what I just noticed? For some reason, Shadow is acting just like Omega. The way Shadow is talking and the way he acts actually sounds like he's beginning to take all of his values from Omega. Just hear me out here. Shadow's recklessness, his arrogance, his inability to follow orders, his reluctance to even consider anybody a friend. Did I just stumble onto some old Sega knowledge? Did they mix up Shadow and Omega's character notes in their studios? Is it possible that they accidentally morphed two characters together and then they kept them both around while demanding that everybody write Shadow like Omega? Am I crazy here? Or are these two not close to being the same character? Did I just crack some sort of code? Did they just find out that they mixed up these two character notes? Because if Prime's anything to go off of, Shadow kinda acts like himself again, no? The Zombots swiftly begin overrunning the two, with Shadow ripping out Omega's chest. Unable to retaliate, Omega is overrun, shouting, "Victory or death." What? As Sonic is about to succumb to the Zombots, he's saved just in time by Silver, along with Tails. Okay, yeah, that was actually pretty close. I like that. That was good. That was good. Silver is able to open up a path for Sonic to run and get to the tornado that's landed just outside the city. Meanwhile, Tails swoops down to pick up Omega. Silver narrowly dodges the Shadow Zombot, who is just scaling walls and jumping now, apparently able to determine key areas to strike repeatedly. The four manage to escape the city and return to the Restoration HQ. Sonic reunites with Cream here. Cream, still being awake, surprises Sonic, with him asking if it's past her bedtime. But Vanilla is letting Cream stay up and help. Cream states that she's been having nightmares due to the constant waves of sadness and displaced people all around. Though Cream has been working as the light of the HQ. Cream leads Sonic to Amy, and after slight protest by General, contested by Cream again, Sonic is able to be let inside. Amy is busy calling out orders for her various teams. I can't imagine Amy or Knuckles naming the teams Echo. As Sonic decides to go to Rouge, and after revealing what happened to Shadow, she promptly leaves upset and hurt. Although Amy wanted to catch up with Sonic, she's immediately bombarded by alerts from her teams, and one not responding at all, to which Sonic decides it's best for him to leave. Sonic runs into Vector and Espio, just waking from a rest, ready to look for survivors, supplies, and maybe Charmy. Sonic and the two briefly comment on the safety of bringing Charmy back. We learn that Sonic apparently can take short burst naps. The only time when this would have happened is before the attack of Seaside City. So Sonic hasn't slept since then, but we also have no perception of time in this comic, so that's pretty much entirely irrelevant, and we don't have a solid scope on how long it's been since Sonic has actually had a rest. Sonic meets with Tails and Silver, and they discuss how Silver's future looks. Nothing we haven't already known, but it was solid foreshadowing way back in the day, where Silver in fact did talk about how everything was metallic. And if you remember, there was also nothing else around. Silver makes it specifically clear that there were no Zombots in his time, so assumedly, the virus just melded itself into each other after taking over the whole planet. Or possibly something even worse took place. Pretty ominous. We learn that Omega is all good. What's left of him, that is, and Tails plans to rebuild him. Okay. Unable to pinpoint the specifics of the metal virus, Tails gives Sonic a device that will read his biometrics in order to track how his speed mingles with the metal virus in his system. The problem is that HQ doesn't have a computer that can handle the data required, and Tails will need to get to Central City. Well, Tails, you should probably have one of your computers inside of the HQ. I'm pretty sure that makes the most sense. The trio locks in the plan to find a cure for the metal virus through Sonic in a race to get to Central City before Eggman can infect it. Meanwhile, back on the Face ship, Starline comes to terms that Eggman will be letting the virus run rampant and sees that even testing an override won't work. So the Doctor searches for something that Eggman may have used in the past to assist him today. To where Dr. Starline stumbled upon the Lost World Project? The Deadly Six? Come on, dude, are you serious? One of the groups that is unanimously hated? There's like 10 people in the entire fandom that genuinely enjoyed the Deadly Six, and we're bringing them into the story? Oh man, the metal virus was supposed to be the good arc. Like, comment, subscribe, follow me on Twitter. Okay, bye!